In this video, I'm going to show you what happened in a game between Nijat Abasov and Fabiano Caruana in their battle for the third place at the World Cup. This is a really exciting game with a very spectacular finish. So stay from the beginning till the end and then you will see some amazing tactical ideas. First, make sure to subscribe to the channel and then I will thank everyone who has done that so far already. An incredible increase of subscribers, which is great news as the channel wants to grow. Of course, you also want to grow as a chess player, so watch this game with me. d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, and here Abasov deviates from the London system, which he has played earlier in the tournament, and instead of the move bishop f4, he played the move c4. And now we are getting back to the well-known Catalan opening after the move g3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castling kingside by white as well. And after d takes c4, queen c2, if you have watched my video from yesterday between Goryachkina and Salimova from the women's final, you remember this exact position as Salimova played here the move b5. Was a very exciting game, which eventually she lost after a really big fight, and therefore Goryachkina turned out to be the winner of the Women's World Cup. A more solid continuation is played by Fabiano. He played here the move a6. And here, white can recapture the pawn with the queen immediately, allowing black to play b5 followed by bishop b7. It's pretty okay for black. Nowadays, the move a4, preventing black from playing the move b5 to protect the pawn is more common. Black goes bishop d7 in that case, and after queen takes c4, now the bishop finds a different way to reach the long diagonal, to neutralize the pressure usually exerted by white's light squared bishop. Bishop g5, white continues with the development of its pieces. Knight bd7, knight c3, and both sides are doing reasonably well here. It's a pretty solid position for black, but if you look at these pieces, it's a pretty cramped situation, and particularly the queen is not able to move. You would like to move your queen to connect your rook so that these pieces can also join play very soon. Therefore, the move h6 is played, questioning the bishop. In the majority of games, white decided now to trade off the bishop for the knight. It's a very interesting clash between bishop versus knight. White has a space advantage, so it's not easy for black to employ the bishop pair later on. But Abasov thinks differently. He says, I don't want to exchange bishops. I keep the bishop on the board. Bishop is doing well on f4. Putting pressure a bit against the pawn on c7, even though you cannot win the pawn yet. It also means that the bishop from c6 cannot easily move away, as otherwise the queen, or maybe later on a rook, will be able to target that pawn on c7. Therefore, Caruana's move is very understandable. He goes for bishop d6, offering the exchange of bishops. And after bishop takes d6, c takes d6, we get a very equal, symmetrical pawn structure. Looks pretty comfortable for black. Therefore, white is not going to take here himself, play the move queen to d3. And this is an interesting idea. The queen itself was not doing too much on c4. If the queen stays there, you always got to reckon with knight b6 ideas to attack the queen. So the queen goes back to the center, keeps control over valuable squares in that part of the board, protects the pawn on d4 as well. Bishop takes f4. It's an interesting decision. It was definitely not needed, but it's very tempting, of course, to double the pawns. And the question is, of course, are these double pawns weak, or can they be used as an asset? First of all, with having pawns on d4 and f4, you get a better grip on the e5 square. So maybe a knight can come there at some point. Black played a5. It's also a very typical move as you're trying to fix the b4 square, not allowing white to advance the pawn to b4 anytime soon, as otherwise the bishop could potentially get in trouble. And now Abasov goes for the move king h1, revealing one of its main ideas of going for this structure with a doubled pawn, as he's vacating the g file for the rook to come over. And who knows what the rook can do there. Now, again, it's not a forcing position. There are multiple plans for both sides. I think a move like queen e7 to connect the rooks makes sense. Also knight d5, offering the exchange of one pair of knights. And maybe the other knight can come over to to f6. And another interesting idea worth mentioning here is something like king h8. This is a move you would not expect, but like white, you can try to put the rook on the g file and maybe even prepare to advance the g-pawn to come to g5. It's a very interesting idea. Maybe in the future we will see what's going to be played in this line. But Fabi played bishop takes f3, giving up the bishop for the knight. It's of course a small concession as the bishop is actually quite a nice piece, but you enable yourself here to play the move c6, so the bishop cannot put too much pressure on that diagonal. And of course, it's a sort of relief to exchange another set of minor pieces. Here, another big moment, as rook g1 is the most logical move played in the game. But here, black could still have played knight d5. I think if black can further initiate exchanges, that would definitely help him. So maybe starting with e4 also comes into consideration. You have a massive pawn center preventing the knight from coming to d5. Anyway, didn't happen. Rook g1. Black played here king h8. But now e4 was played anyway. And here you see that the knight is struggling to find a good square. Queen e7. And here white continues with the plan of launching an initiative on the king side with the move rook to g3. After rook a8, the other rook comes over to g1, threatening to take on g7. Things are not looking too dangerous yet, as black can still defend here with rook g8, but his position is a little bit passive. But on the other hand, there could be counterplay, maybe against the pawn on d4, maybe the b4 square can be used by the queen at some point, who knows. But here Abasov is first, and Abasov is playing very actively this time, plays the move e5, attacking the knight on f6, and you would think the knight will come to d5. Was not played in the game, and it's for good reason, because now after knight takes d5, you got to recapture with a pawn. And if you take, for instance, with the c pawn, there's no longer any pressure against that pawn on d4. So the knight looks bad, the rook looks bad, and with a move like f5, white undoubles the f-pawns, puts a little bit of pressure there. And for instance, after ef5, queen f5, massive pressure against the pawn on d5. It's a long-term weakness. The bishop can even be rerouted to this diagonal, so you can set up threats. Definitely, black is starting to sweat in such a situation. So Fabi doesn't go for knight d5. Played here knight to h7. And now the queen leaves the d file. So no any sort of pins against that queen. The queen is doing okay here. But how should black play here? That is the big question. And of course, the move played by Fabi is very logical. He played here this move knight b6, so that the knight controls the d5 square. It also gets something to do. You're opening up the path for the rook to target the pawn on d4. And so far, there are no immediate threats against the black king. However, it should be pointed out that a move like f5 is also very interesting. It's a move I like a lot to close the position and to open up the 7th rank, so you're in touch with your g-pawn. Everything is perfectly under control. And okay, the position is blocked. The bishop doesn't have any clear targets. If you ever take with the e-pawn, then the knight can come back into play. Black has a weak pawn on e6, but also black's pawns are not looking too great. Knight b6 played in the game, and now Abasov improves its bishop, brings it to the b1 h7 diagonal. And here again, there are some questions. What should black do? Not knight d5, because now the knight will be taken. After c takes d5, the knight will come in via b5 to d6, preparing f5 ideas. White has a tremendous initiative. That's not a good move. But here again, f5 is the way to go for black. Was also not played by Fabi. After e takes f6, you got to open the diagonal for your bishop. Knight recaptures. Things are far from clear. You can drop back with the bishop, but after any move, you can set up a battery with your queen, but the knight covers the h7 square and black has counterplay. The files are open, which means that as long as the threats are parried, black has ideas to start targeting these pawns on the open files. But Fabi got ambitious. He didn't want to play f5. He played here the move queen to b4. It's a double attack against the pawn on b2 and the pawn on d4. But now his queen is leaving the defensive part of the board and allows here this idea. Bishop takes h7. Maybe a remarkable idea is, why would you trade off your wonderful bishop for that knight on h7, which isn't doing much? After king takes, the knight comes into e4, and the knight is a really strong piece, but this is probably what Fabi had been anticipating, believing that he could just take the pawn on d4. He didn't play it in the end because probably he realized in time that there is knight g5 check. This is an amazing shot. The knight cannot be taken, because if you do so, it's rook h3 with check. The king has to go to g6, and then all of a sudden it's checkmate with rook takes g5. Both rooks are covering the g and h file. The pawn on e5 prevents the king from escaping to f6. Let's get back 1 second. After knight g5, you can't ignore the knight. If you go back with that knight, with that king, sorry, there's knight takes f7 and the position just falls apart. Queen takes d4 is not a possibility. How about rook takes d4? Is that possible? Well, maybe it's a possibility, but now the rook has left the back rank. And this is a very fascinating idea. Look, rook takes g7 with check. Idea is that after rook takes, you give a check with your knight on f6. The king can only go back to h8, but then it's rook takes g7 as well, threatening checkmate on either g8 or h7. You can give a check, but after king g2, nothing changes. You don't have to give the check. If you take the rook, it's queen g3 with check, and after king f8, try to run away. It's queen g8, king e7, queen e8 with checkmate. Thanks to the cooperation of pawn, knight, and queen. Beautiful mating motive. Nothing is working in all of these lines, and you see that white has too many pieces directed at the black king. Rook takes g7 sometimes, but particularly knight to g5 is a huge threat as it attacks the queen, the king, sorry, and the pawn on f7. In the game, Fabi went back with the queen, realized the queen needs to come over to help out. But it's already too late because Abasov went here for this move, f5. This is a beautiful pawn sacrifice. What is the idea by allowing black to capture this pawn? Well, here white would go for this move, knight to f6 with check, with the point that the knight cannot be taken as it allows the queen sacrifice. Queen takes h6. There's nothing black can do apart from taking the queen, but then it's again double check with both the rooks. You are controlling both the G and H file. It's game over. Of course, the alternative is to ignore the knight with king h8, but then again, queen sacrifice. Queen takes h6. Beautiful shot. After g takes, it's rook takes g8, rook takes g8 with checkmate. Now it's a mating pattern with rook and knight. So after f5, black is completely busted, and Fabi probably really mad with himself, hating himself for making this stupid blunder with queen before he resigned. Maybe this looks premature to most of you, but black's position is absolutely awful. There's nothing you can do here. Black will probably face this move f6. For instance, if you play knight d5, f6 will be played. And here again, g takes f6 is never a possibility because of queen takes h6, followed by rook h3 with the same ladder mate of two rooks at the side of the board. So that is game over. One other example here is that if you take the queen, you can take the pawn with check. First, after rook takes, the king goes back into the corner, and now it's just time to take the queen yourself as well. Everything is hanging. The rook on d8, the knight on e3, also the rook on g7. But first, if this would have happened in the game, black would have to move the rook. But now it's knight f6 with devastating threats. If you take on e7, it's once again rook g8 with checkmate. That is not possible. If you go king takes g7, then you can simply capture on e8 with check. King goes to g6, and then it's knight d6. You can even capture the knight on e3, but why not try to promote your pawn as quickly as you can? Fabi didn't want to see it, and he just resigned, as I said, after this move f5. Such a crushing attack at the finals of the World Cup. It's something you rarely see, but it really shows that Abasov is such a great player. Despite being 150 points lower rated than his opponent, he just crushed Fabi in only 26 moves. And that means that Fabi needs to bounce back tomorrow in order to tie the match, take it to a tiebreak. Really exciting stuff. And of course, we'll also keep an eye on the real final between Pragnananda and Magnus Carlsen. So stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and then I'll promise to be back tomorrow again. See you soon. Bye bye.